Hi, I'm Marcus Allen. Nexus Magazine, the world's leading alternative news magazine. And there are two types of people in the world, those who read Nexus and those who are about to. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to this year, 2020's Unite Planet Christmas show. Well, it's a little bit different this year, but what isn't different this year? It's been one of them years, right? So it's only right that we should have a different kind of Christmas show. It's not because of COVID, we would have still done the same kind of thing, but, people are busy, what with the washing and the cooking and the ironing, so we've all got things to do, but we still managed to put together a Christmas show. Much of that as well has been working with the Paranormal Peepshow guys. If you've not checked out their channel, please do. And I urge you to subscribe. There's some great content there, great interviews as well. So if you're thinking of having a paranormal kind of Christmas, what better place to go to than the Paranormal Peepshow guys? So get yourself over there. But yes, the Christmas festivities are just the same. We've got some great guests, great little chat, jokes. And we'll still throw in some of those Christmas songs as well. And one of them is coming up right now. Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby, of course, with that great seasonal favourite, White Christmas. I'm just going to have myself a mince pie and settle down and watch that. Cheers. Happy Christmas.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know, where the treetops glisten and children listen to hear sleigh bells in the snow. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, with every Christmas card I write. May your days be merry and bright, and may all your Christmases be white. Well, don't just stand there. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, with every Christmas card I write. May your days be merry and bright, and may all your Christmases be white. Merry Christmas, Bing. Merry Christmas, Frank. Merry Christmas, everybody.
May your days be merry and bright, and may all your
everybody. You're joining the Paranormal Peepshow meets Unite Planet Christmas Special 2020. Hello, everyone. How is everyone?
Oh, well.
Hey Neil, how you doing?
Oh,
Josh, oh my goodness. Who's that ho-ho-hoing? It's not me.
Santa.
It looks like Santa there. Has Santa come on to this?
It's a very
welcome.
straightforward looking stiff Santa. He's not even moving. He's obviously had a bit too much of the old,
I'm meditating.
Rudolph's rum or something.
I'm meditating, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, he's
Listeners to
meditating.
the Paranormal Peepshow, viewers to Unite Planet. I just wanted to wish everyone a very, very Merry Christmas.
I
Have you
actually
even
thought
said
it
that
was
without moving your lips?
I actually thought it was James Randi there.
Oh, that was the last show.
It's the mystical magician who's obviously returned from the afterlife to wish us a Merry Christmas.
As Santa. Wow.
I'm sure he will at some point. Yes, he will.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever the case may be.
Ho, ho, ho.
It's actually me.
Oh, hang on there.
I think James Randi would be saying no, no, no.
Ho, ho, ho.
No. Yeah, that's a torture.
Oh, hello, everyone. It's me.
Well, it's Ben. How are you,
Thought it
Ben?
sounded familiar.
I'm all right, thanks. Thanks for inviting me onto the show, guys. I wish a happy Christmas to everybody, and it's great to be here. It's great to have Christmas again, and even though there's a lockdown, we're all stuck in our own little ways, but it won't stop us celebrating. We're still going to
That's right.
have
And
fun.
as part of those celebrations, I went out using the big budget of Paranormal UK Radio Network to buy us some mince pies. We need them back for next year, so don't scoff them all at once. So help yourself, everybody.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, right. Lovely.
Not that. Thank you.
I dropped it. Dan, sorry.
Mine's actually in the teleporter that I've got here, so it's flashing away. I'll just go and get it. Hold on.
Okay, I wonder what that strange noise was.
Damn it. I dropped mine. That's bad luck, but I'll have to have some later. But thanks anyway, Neil.
Okay, well, I'm going to enjoy mine. I'd imagine coming through a teleporter, it might have microwaved the heat up a little bit, and it's probably it needs a bit of cream to go with that. How's it come through, Andy, through your teleporter?
It was a mince pie you sent, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely a mince pie.
Only my end, it's come as a little cherry bakewell
It's
tart.
transgendered slightly. It's got an extra bit now, but we won't have to mention it. The politically correct might jump down on us. So
It could be a Mandela effect. This could actually be a mince pie, how I remember it.
I think we're going to have to call these next year mincing pies.
Matt Lucas on the Great British Bake Off. That's how he appeared.
Who's that, sorry?
Matt Lucas on the Great British Bake Off. He
Oh,
was
yeah.
one of the presenters, and he painted his head red and came as a Bakewell tart, which Andy is now eating.
So, Andy's eating Matt Lucas. Wow.
I am.
But don't get mixed up.
He
People
doesn't
say I
know
look
about
like
it yet,
him, so
but
don't
he will
don't come and eat me, because people tell me I look like him.
No, you don't.
George Dawes. Ben, you look nothing like George Dawes. Out of interest, what are the scores so far?
Oh, what? Sorry, Andy.
You don't look like George Dawes at all. What are the scores so far?
All right, I don't get that. Sorry, I don't watch enough TV.
Yes, I'm going to go, I think, for the spaghetti bolognese. Can I have it, please, without the bolognese sauce? And I don't want any pasta, so it'd just be a plate, please. Thank you. At the end of that round, Jack has one, Ulrika has nothing.
Shooting stars, I remember that.
Shooting Stars?
Yeah.
No.
No, I'm not familiar with that
Ben,
either.
you're going to have to watch it. Your homework will be to go and watch Shooting Stars.
Right,
It's got
so
a late 90s, but
I will have to do that at some point. Yes, Andy, I
it
will.
was
Thanks.
before when comedy died, but when it became politically correct and just kind of died a death.
It has. I tend to avoid comedy these days because it's
Me too.
So it's just not funny. That's the problem.
I'll tell you what.
If
I've
it's ever
come
put on
across-
DVD, they sell it at Reggie Perrin's Grot Shop. I don't know if anyone's old enough to get that one.
I came across an article, a newspaper article, saying that 75% of the BBC's comedians are left-leaning or outright leftists. That's actually quite a low number. I thought it was about 99%.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I mean, anyone who's not with the programming tends to get kicked out these days. You know,
I think basically
names are
you get given a book of Karl Marx, and it's like, do you approve of this? Yes, you're in. No, you're out.
It's very sad. It really is that they've gone that far left.
Do you know what else they've done, Marcus? I don't know if you're a fan of League of Gentlemen, Papa Lazarou and Tubbs and all that thing. League of Gentlemen was, for anyone who doesn't know, it was a really, really dark, twisted, but extremely funny comedy, late 90s, early 2000s. There is now, I think it's on Netflix, but it might be on other streaming services, a disclaimer that they put up saying, this is a comedy that people found funny of its age or something like that. It was found funny. It may contain offensive language and controversial topics. And I'm just thinking, this is League of Gentlemen.
Yes? Hello, Dave.
Before they stop showing Carry On films, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, surely comedy is meant to be offensive in some way.
Yeah, it's really supposed to push boundaries, but apparently it's not to some people's taste now.
Yeah, they used to, before they stopped showing the Carry On films and things at Christmas, they actually did show them, but they put like content warnings before them saying this film is so many years old, and it's what some viewers may be offended by some of the rather antiquated ideas about sex, gender, and race and things like that.
Matron, take them away. Ho ho ho.
But of course, it's been exposed now. I mean, all this sort of cultural Marxism, I think, is being exposed before it's had the chance to become completely hegemonic, which is good news, because when people can see it, it essentially loses its power, because it depends on secrecy and not being perceived.
Yeah.
The thing is, how many people really take it on board? I'll tell you why. Because on YouTube and Facebook, etc., whenever there's kind of like mainstream things being pushed out of a cultural Marxist agenda, I don't know if you guys check the comments, but almost all of the comments completely slate it. Even BBC News is about 50-50. So you'll be some people that are completely on board, but a hell of a lot of the comments are completely slating whatever this mainstream thing is that they're putting out. So I'm wondering if they are trying to put forward the notion that cultural Marxism is actually more popular than it really deeply is with people.
Oh, of course. I mean, they of course. I mean,
I even saw it with Porridge. I mean, Porridge had that disclaimer on as well, saying, saying it's of its age and the jokes are, a little bit dated. Even Porridge, it's crazy.
There's nothing offensive about Porridge. No. I'm sorry, there's nothing offensive.
They even said naff off, which was a word they made up because they couldn't say the F word. And so the word naff off was made up to kind of substitute it. And that was in the mid-70s,
Now, naff off.
They were trying to be correct then, oddly enough, Anyway, Marcus, you are our resident expert on all things space, if I can sort of say that, and that's space from the past and also space of the present. So you've got a great interest in the Apollo moon landings because you believe they're partly hoaxed or completely hoaxed, and also there's the Artemis program, which is the replacement, the successor to the Apollo moon landings. Can you explain a little bit all about that for our listeners that are not familiar with all this?
Okay. You can probably tell that I'm old enough to have been around when the alleged Apollo landings actually happened, or were told they happened. 1969, the first one. Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins landed on the moon. And we all watched it live on television, didn't we? Well, I did. 3:30 in the morning it was, and I was very impressed. And I thought, what a wonderful thing to have done. They got to the moon. And then over the next sort of 20 years, I believed it. I thought, this is for real. This must be something that we can all celebrate. And what a wonderful place America must be to have achieved it. And what leadership they must have to have engendered such complete activity. And then about 30 years ago, started to question. Now, that was around the time that the internet started to become a thing. And you could go onto the internet and you could look at things that you wanted to find out about. And it was much easier than going down to the library and looking in books. And I discovered that not only was it completely faked, but that people still believed that it was real. It's a very strange sensation when you get, and you can demonstrate scientifically that it was faked, because it's not possible for humans to reach the moon. Now, there's a difference between humans reaching the moon and unmanned satellites reaching the moon. They can do it quite easily because those satellites can be, or spacecraft can be, the technical term is hardened against the radiation. Oh, radiation. There's a problem in space with radiation, is there? I didn't know that, many people will say. They may have heard of the Van Allen radiation belts, named after Professor James Van Allen of Iowa University, to give him his full title. And he just confirmed that they existed by the simple expedient of putting a Geiger counter on top of one of the very first American rockets to be launched, Explorer 1. And they were surprised when this Geiger counter stopped reading. It just stopped. End of story. And they looked at the data and they found that the Geiger counter had been overwhelmed by the radiation levels in space. Whoops, they said, we'll put another Geiger counter on the next one. Well, that didn't work, so they put one on Explorer 4. And they got up and confirmed that there were 2 belts of radiation surrounding the Earth, which is quite natural. It's a completely natural phenomenon, and it protects us from the radiation generated by the sun, and also galactic cosmic rays from deep space. So what you've got there is a major anomaly. These alleged astronauts, well, they're not alleged astronauts, they allegedly went beyond this Van Allen radiation belt, but they're the only people who've ever done it. No other human has been more than about 250 or 300 miles up into space, which is where the International Space Station is. So what you've got is this anomaly in the scientific evidence, which now has been more or less confirmed that space, as was said back in the 1950s, is radioactive. Not a good place for humans. But there's another thing about space. It's a vacuum, a complete vacuum. In fact, the further away from Earth you go, the harder the vacuum becomes, because there's just nothing there. That is what a vacuum is about. There's nothing there. There's nothing in space to have any validity. So what you've got is a complete vacuum. Now, one of the things that vacuums do, there are 2 things vacuums do. One is to outgas any liquids, which means that you can put water into a vacuum chamber and lower the vacuum and it will boil at about 20 or 30 degrees centigrade. Normally on Earth, water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. The lower the harder the vacuum, the lower the temperature at which liquids boil. Now, the other thing is called cold welding, where metals in contact with each other in space will literally weld themselves together because the metals outgas. And the atoms, which are outgassed, intermingle and in effect weld together. So we're told that there were photographs taken of astronauts on the lunar surface, and we've seen them, because that is the main evidence that people put forward to say, well, it must have happened. Look, we've got all these wonderful photographs. But if photographic film is outgassed in a vacuum, which it is, and it's been demonstrated to be outgassed. I have a colleague in Canada who's done the experimentation using a vacuum chamber, which doesn't produce anything near the level of vacuum that we get on the moon. And photographic film is completely shot. The color balance in the film is wrecked. The film itself will start to get so brittle it won't go through a camera. So how are these photographs taken? They weren't taken on the moon, but any one other place they could have been taken, here on Earth. Which is where they
Marcus,
were.
can I quickly jump into with the color balance thing?
Yeah, sure. Go on.
Okay. Recently, there's been the Chinese have successfully landed a I don't know what they call it, Chang'e 5 or something like that on the moon.
Yeah, Chang'e.
And their color photos of the moon show the moon surface to be very brown and very beige in color, whereas the NASA photographs, the color ones that they have, it looks more gray in color. Do you think it's either modern technology that is more color realistic, or do you think that, dare I say it, the NASA footage is gray because that's their set?
Well, a very interesting point there, because it allows me to introduce the difference between photographic film and digital. Chang'e 5, the Chinese mission, and most modern missions going anywhere into space use digital equipment, digital cameras, digital video. And digital is not affected in the same way. It can be affected because the CCD chips can be affected, but the Chang'e mission photographs may well be correct in the color. Now, when the Apollo missions were sent, there'd been a previous unmanned satellite called the Surveyor craft, and the Lunar Orbiter. Not to be confused with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, that comes much later. The Lunar Orbiter was sent to the moon to photograph potential landing sites for Apollo. That was quite genuine, quite real, which it did. And most of the photographs were taken in black and white. And you can see these photographs, they exist, there are plenty of them around. So it may well have been that in order to create the simulation for the Apollo missions, which there was a lot of simulation being done, they used these photographs, the Lunar Orbiter mission photographs, which were in black and white, so they didn't have any color to go by. They had no reference to color. So they made it sort of grey and rather boring. Now, because we've now seen photographs of the moon in colour, we're told, those photographs may well be digital, and digital will record it depending on how you want it. You can record digital quite easily. But photographic film does not record in a vacuum. It has to be pressurized. And there are very good historical reasons why I'm quite definite when I say that, because there were two satellites or two craft used photographic film in space. One was the Keyhole satellites, KH-9, launched in 1971. That used photographic film. And the other one was the Lunar Orbiter, and that used photographic film in space around the moon. So how did they get over the problem of photographic film not working in a vacuum? It was pressurized. It was in a completely separate container within the spacecraft that was pressurized to about 1 pound per square inch, but enough pressure to ensure the integrity of the film. Same with the Keyhole satellite. They were pressurized. How do we know this? Because the designer of the camera on the Keyhole satellite said exactly that. The film had to be kept under a degree of pressure to ensure its integrity. I attended the lecture in which he said it. If anybody can dispute that or claim that I'm incorrect, I want to hear about it. I'd love to hear about it, because I don't think I am. I think I'm correct. And extrapolating on from that would imply that no human has landed on the lunar surface, and no photograph has been taken on the lunar surface, because no digital cameras were available during Apollo. They were all photographic film. And if anybody is familiar with photographic film, you'll know that it's a very good medium to record information if you've got it right. But if you're in a vacuum, it's not going to record it. Digital will record it, and this is the difference. Digital cameras will record it in a vacuum because they don't work the same way. But Apollo was all to do with photographic film. So it was all complete nonsense. It was a complete fraud. It was a complete fake. And we can go into the reasons why it was and all the rest of it, if there's time and if anybody's interested. But it was all to do with politics. It was all to do with the Cold War. It was all to do with America has to be seen to beat the Soviet Union. Remember, the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, does it? It's gone. The way of so many things have just disappeared into the ether. So what you've got is the Chinese now doing it. You think, well, the Chinese must know that Apollo was a fake. The Chinese do know that Apollo was a fake. The European Space Agency know it was a fake. The Indians know it's a fake. The Japanese know it was a fake. But it's in their interest to maintain the fiction that it was real, because then they can utilize many of the installations that NASA have available for deep space tracking. So they're being reasonable about it. They're just going ahead. The Chang'e missions are particularly impressive because the Chinese have done something which not many people have been able to do. Interestingly, the Indians attempted it, and they got within a few kilometers of the surface of the moon with their unmanned craft, and then it crashed. The Israelis had much the same result. They were very hopeful it was going to land. And my conclusion about this is that on both those crafts, the Japanese and the Indians and the Israeli craft, they used 3D printed components on part of the craft. On the Indian one, the components were support of the engine, the landing engine, the rocket engine. Now, if they haven't tested those components in the level of vacuum that would be met on the lunar surface, those components may well have failed because they outgassed and so weakened themselves, and they didn't do the job they were designed to do. I was interviewed on Israeli television at the time that this was happening, and I suggested this as a possible solution to the reason why the Israeli craft didn't get onto the lunar surface. And they said, "Oh, we hadn't thought of that." So these things can happen. So looking at the fact that is the key point of the whole space mission. You've got to take into account the level of vacuum. Now, vacuum is measured in something called TOR, T-O-R-R, named after Evangelisco Torricelli, who was an Italian scientist who developed the barometer at the end of the 18th century. So TOR is a measure of vacuum. On Earth, we have, at sea level, it's 760 torr. At the International Space Station, it's torr 10 to the minus 3. At the Moon, it's torr 10 to the minus 12. Very, very low indeed. It's a logarithmic scale that is used. If you understand a logarithmic scale, it doesn't sound as though there's a big difference between minus 3 and minus 12. Oh, yes, there is. It's degrees of difference of about 1 million. So vacuum levels in space, and specifically around the Moon, it's all to do with the fact that there are particles of Earth's atmosphere which manage to get themselves into space because gravity is not enough to pull them back, and they drift off. But the further away you go, the less of them there are. Therefore, the higher the level of vacuum. And vacuum is a very, very powerful force. If it's not being taken into account, spacecraft are going to crash. So the Apollo missions of the 1960s and 70s have now become the Artemis mission of 2018, 19, 20, so on. Artemis was Apollo's twin sister. So guess what? Women on the moon. Ha ha!
We like surprises, don't we? Yes, we do like surprises. Well, guess what? In a surprise announcement, NASA revealed a new name for its moon program, Artemis. She is a Greek goddess of the moon and twin sister of Apollo. Well, NASA picked the name in hopes of having the first woman land on the moon by 2024.
The problem here, they haven't got a spacesuit for them yet, and they haven't got a rocket to launch. They haven't got a lander to get down onto the surface, so NASA have got a bit of work cut out to get themselves onto the lunar surface by 2024, which is not going to happen because they won't be able to get there. We saw the SpaceX super duper Starliner crashed about a week ago. I think it was less than a week ago. It was launched successfully. It got up to about 12 kilometers successfully. It's where it's meant to get. And then it was supposed to drift back down to Earth, float back down to Earth on its wings. And then the engines were supposed to reignite, and it was meant to land back on Earth. But only 2 of the 3 engines ignited, and it crashed. Oh dear. But to be fair to SpaceX, they did say that it was majorly successful. They got all the information they wanted. It's just a pity that engine didn't ignite. And a good thing there were no humans on board as well, because otherwise they would be pancaked. So
have they got this gateway thing they're planning? I mean, that's big difference, isn't it? With the Apollo thing, they just went straight to the moon in their Apollo capsule with the lander. And this time they're going to have like a space station going around the moon. I mean, none of that's been built, I presume.
None of it's been built. None of it's been. I haven't even seen any designs for it. Maybe there are designs for it. It's called Lunar Gateway. They will have an orbiting space station, similar to the International Space Station orbits the Earth. This will orbit the moon. And our lucky astronauts will go up to the gateway, get out, get into another craft to go back onto the moon. But that hasn't been designed or built yet, let alone tested.
It's a lot of gear they got to design to get back to the moon, isn't it? A gateway, Artemis landing craft, new rockets and everything like that, new spacesuits, and of course they just had a change of presidency, possibly, if Trump loses all his cases that he's trying to fight in the thing. I mean, what's the position of Biden on the space front? Is he not really much interested in moon missions, do you think?
No, he's not. He's intimated that he will postpone it, which is a euphemism of saying cancel it. Because any president coming in will have to have their own imprint on NASA. Never a straight answer. No astronauts sent anywhere. Not always scientifically accurate. Numerous anomalies and scams abound. Take your pick. So because there'll be a new president, allegedly, I don't think there will be, but that's another story. Biden has decided that he will make his own imprint on this, and he will probably not do it because it will cost a lot of money. Well, it will cost no more money than keeping NASA going anyway, because most of the money going to NASA is not a vast amount of money these days, about $25 billion. It just pays people's salary. That's all budgets ever do. So whether they're going to the moon or not, it's going to cost the same, because all budgets pay people's salary at the end of the day. It doesn't buy rockets. It pays the people's salary to build the rockets. It doesn't buy space tracking systems. It pays people's salary to use them. It doesn't. I mean, all these things have to be paid for, but you're paying somebody's salary. So if you've got the money to do it, you may as well get on and do your gateway and get people onto the moon. It'd be nice to see it happening, and I'd love to see it happening, but I'm not holding my breath that it's going to happen any time soon. Because, as you've already said, the radiation in space is the showstopper of space. There's Sorry?
I was going to say, Marcus, that this idea, we're going to go to the moon, we're about to go to the moon. NASA have been saying that now since the end of Apollo. And indeed, other countries like Russia and China have also, certainly since the 1990s, they've been saying the same thing.
Yeah,
it's something we're going to do. We're planning to go. But of course, it never really. This is about as far as it's gone. They've actually built a rocket, which might. Well, they could use it for other things if they don't go to the moon. They have actually built a launcher and a manned capsule. But as you say, this little space station that goes around the moon, the Gateway space station, that's a big project. It's a lot more complicated than Apollo with that.
Yeah,
and the lander, like you said, that's not been built yet. So. I don't know if anyone really believes that 2024 is a realistic scenario, unless, of course, they plan to fake it again.
Well,
I mean, it could be.
Let's just say if they try to fake it this time, there are going to be so many people watching it who are fully informed as to what went on the first time. They're going to be watching out. They won't be able to get away with it this time.
They can't lose all their tapes and all the stuff that was supposedly lost for, because they presumably have to publish it instantly on the internet for people to look at.
Exactly. And film taken on the mission. The famous film of Armstrong and Aldrin putting up their little picture of the Earth in the window and saying, "Look, we're halfway to the moon." No, they weren't. Why was the blue outside the other window? Why
do they hold the camera so far back from the window? Why is it on the? They filmed it from the other side of the capsule.
Yeah, and they actually said that we've got the camera against the window. They were lying. These guys lie for a living.
Do you know what the Apollo supporters actually say about that? They say, well, they didn't want to film out the window directly because the camera lens might have broken the window. This is hardened against micrometeorite strikes.
Of course it is.
and they're worried that the camera lens might have bumped against the window and cracked the glass, or whatever. So the very strong material they use, the very strong glass they use for the window. I mean, it's getting dark. It's getting crazy. The defenders of this are getting really. They're letting their imaginations run away with them now.
Yeah. Like that famous explanation of how they managed to avoid the Van Allen belts. They took a polar route.
Oh yes,
they didn't, because check any of the press packs, and I've got the Apollo 11 press pack. They went straight through the Van Allen belts. Launching from Florida, where they did, you fly it over Africa, then you see the Eye of Africa, the Richat structure. Then you go on to India and South America, and you go on around the Earth that way. You don't go anywhere near the poles.
It's not as if the Saturn V had a steering wheel.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the direction of the moon, is it? The moon's in another direction.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing indicators as it went up, indicating left and north or something.
Turn left here.
yeah. Paul and Johnny, now you've introduced Andrew Johnson, who's also considered the Apollo missions as fake. What was your opinion, or what did you think when you interviewed Andrew Johnson on that subject?
Well, I mean, we looked at the moon landings before we obviously interviewed Andrew, but I mean, after that, when we looked at it even more, there's so many anomalies to it, and I always find that whenever you watch on mainstream TV, whenever they do any of these kind of conspiracy programs, they'll pick about 2 or 3 of the anomalies that they can explain, and they won't mention about any of the others that you can't. And they'll depict that as that's all of the anomalies, and that's how they present it. So that's something I got when I watch, knowing what I know now and looking at it, when I watch any of these mainstream TV shows on the conspiracy, beyond anything, not just the moon landings, but using that as an example. They'll frame it as this is everything that we know about it, and we've explained it. That's it.
Yeah, it's so sad that they keep coming up with. I mean, there are books being published this year, which attempt to refute the whole Apollo conspiracy. They say, well, of course there are stars. They talk about stars in the bloody sky.
Yeah.
40 years. These bloody flapping flags. They've been flapping for 50 years. It was Bill Casing who first suggested that, and that was in 1966. More or less the same time as the film Capricorn 1 came out.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing about the flags, because I was watching the flag setting up of Apollo 17, which was the last mission back in 1973, I think, around Christmas time, I understand, with Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt, who was the geologist that landed on the moon. And the video I saw showed them setting up the flag, which was the one that they had for all the previous missions. This particular flag had been hanging up in mission control. And someone said, oh, it's a good idea that this flag goes to the moon or something. Now, we've spoken to Scott Henderson on the Apollo Detectives, who showed us very close-up images of this flag, and it shows it's a wet flag. You can actually see the dampness in the wet flag. And we thought, oh my God. Now, I actually wondered, because Schmidt says, or Cernan, I can't remember which one says, it's almost as if it's blown in the wind when the flag's moving around. I actually wondered if they'd deliberately made the flag wet to stop, to give it a sense of weight, to stop it blowing. And so therefore it's almost like a wet, damp cloth, and it won't billow so much. In the same way that it's been suggested that the lunar soil, to stop it making, when you throw it up in the air, it won't be like a smoky effect of light particles floating, that they mix that with a thin oil or something so it immediately falls back to the ground. I actually wonder if that was deliberately made wet for that reason. And then the video also saw is that when they sort of stretched the flag out, I heard a ping as the flag kind of like straightened out, and I thought, hang on a minute. So I rewound it and watched it again. I thought, there's definitely a ping sort of noise there that's going on. So I thought, well, let's just cross-reference this with other channels that have got the same footage. So I went onto other channels, NASA or whoever it was, and I saw the same scene, but this time it didn't have the ping sound. So I wondered, either is that ping sound being added on, or was that the original ping sound on the footage, but on the other clips someone's managed to remove it? I don't know, but I thought it was a very suspicious thing.
There's certainly some weird stuff, because there's a picture on the official NASA website of it was basically a sort of section for kids, explaining about space and explaining about all the things that were wonderful about NASA. And one of the things they wanted to explain was that obviously in space, you can't hear anything. Space, nobody can hear you scream and all that. And they had this picture on their website of, I think it was Apollo 15, where the astronaut, was Dave Scott, was banging in the bottom part of the flag, of the flagpole. And you could hear him banging it.
Trying to fall. Don't wear your hand out.
When somebody pointed this out, that you shouldn't be able to hear anything on the moon, that page was removed from the NASA website. But it was discovered on the Wayback Machine, and somebody brought it out and said, look, NASA have been caught out yet again. Because they keep coming up with these ridiculous ideas of how they got men to the moon. And we're expected to believe it. But the point is, NASA can't possibly go back and say, sorry guys, it was all a political event. We were doing the very best job we could of fooling the Russians. The trouble is, we fooled the world as well. Because we couldn't get to the moon, we had to fake it. And if you've spotted the joins in the picture, well, it's only because you've been examining it for 50 years, you can see those joins. What we're going to do now is actually go back for real. That's the Artemis program. We're going back for real. No, they're not, because they can't get humans to the moon. They can get satellites, artificial satellites, or unmanned satellites. They can go to the moon. That's not a problem. But humans, we're very delicate little creatures. We've got to take our own atmosphere with us. And we don't like vacuum. And we can't survive without air. So we've got to have a spacesuit. Pity we haven't designed one yet. And the idea that humans can survive without pressure is nonsense. Because you try climbing Everest without oxygen, see how far you get. Maybe you get to 27,000 feet, but you get to 29,000 feet. There are very few people who can survive at that height without oxygen. It's not that the air doesn't have sufficient oxygen in it to breathe. The problem is the pressure. At the height of Mount Everest, the atmospheric pressure, which is 14.7 pounds per square inch at sea level, the height of Everest is 5 pounds per square inch. That is insufficient pressure to force the air into the lungs against the back pressure in the human body of 14.7 pounds per square inch. So you've got this imbalance between pressure, and you can't survive unless you can get sufficient air in. And that it's not the oxygen. There's plenty of oxygen up there. It's the pressure. And that point always seems to be missed. It always seems to be omitted because I don't think people fully understand it.
I've got a funny story about Mount Everest, actually, and it must have been something to do with the air pressure. And it concerns, I would say, someone in my removed, distant family. And I won't say names for fear of getting sued. But basically, he was a young lad, and he was given a lot of money to go up Mount Everest with his friend and a Sherpa carrying all the luggage and stuff like that. And they must have got to a certain point, but he ended up with a very sore, embarrassing problem on his bottom, namely a boil that started to swell up on his bum. It must be something to do with the change in altitude or something like that. And he couldn't go up because it's too painful to ascend up the mountain, and he couldn't go down. So he was stuck on Mount Everest with literally a pain in the arse. So what does he do? What do all good mountaineers do in that situation? They get on their satellite phone and ring their mummy. That's what he did. Really? He rang up his mum. And he goes, Mummy, I've got a boil on my bum and I'm up Mount Everest. What do I do? So she basically said, well, you're going to have to get a sharp implement and sterilize it and stab it. And so, because his best mate was with him, his mate had to do it. And they soaked it in like hand gel or something. And his mate, he obviously became a very good mate after that. He had to stab this boil on his bum. And after that, it was all okay. The pressure subsided and he could walk back down the mountain again. So I'd imagine it's a bit like tires expanding under some sort of vacuum or something like that. That's how he suffered. So I can understand the whole pressure thing completely.
Oh, yeah. It's pressure that's the problem, or lack of pressure. Because the higher up you go, the less pressure there is. That's why you see in the International Space Station, there's very little pressure there. There is pressure. You get to the moon, forget it, no pressure. And that is the point that is, in all the discussion about the Apollo fakery, that is the one area that has not been addressed properly. I'm the only person I know that has addressed it, because as I say, I attended this talk in London. It's about September 2018 it was, because the working of the KH-19 keyhole satellite had only just been declassified, and therefore the designer of the cameras, the guy listening to, was able to talk about it. So it was very recent that the information, and I put two and two together, and I thought, well, hang on a minute, you've got to have pressure for film to work in a vacuum. What about Apollo? And I actually asked him it. I said, would this apply to Apollo? He said, of course it would. So Apollo shot to pieces.
Would they have somehow vacuum sealed the cameras on the Hasselblads in some way, maybe? Just to, devil's advocate type of question?
No, it would be possible to do it, but they didn't do it, because the number of times you can see pictures of the Hasselblad cameras attached to astronauts on their chest, they're not pressurized. It's a basic camera. I've actually handled a replica camera. You can get them from Hasselblad UK. Well, you can't get it. You can borrow one from Hasselblad UK. And they look identical to the cameras you see on astronauts on the lunar surface. The other thing is that, of course, there were film cameras, Mara 16mm film cameras, mounted inside the lunar module as they landed. And that's fine, up until the point you depressurize the whole lunar module to get out, because there's no airlock. So those film cameras wouldn't work either. But video cameras, on the other hand, do work. But most of the film that we see is taken with film camera. And that is the difference. You've got to know the difference between a film camera and a digital camera. Or a video camera, which is digital. They're not affected by a vacuum in any way the same way.
Interesting.
So basically, Apollo is fake.
Interesting.
It couldn't happen. One thing you can prove me wrong on that, please do so.
One thing I want to ask you, Marcus, when the Apollo program began, do you think initially they went into it genuinely wanting to work in actually to get on the moon, and it come to a point where they knew that there's no way we could do this, and then that's when the fakery aspect came in? Do you think that's what happened? Is that how you view it? Yeah. That's
the famous speech by John Kennedy, in 1961. They had no idea of any of this. No American had been into space at that point. Alan Shepard, who was the first one up, and he only went up 100 miles, came down again. John Glenn was the first to orbit, and that was 1962. So they had no idea. It was Kennedy. He's a fairly canny politician. And he basically said, well, what can we do because the Russians had sent their Sputnik satellite up to orbit the Earth, which of course upset everybody. So Kennedy said, well, what can we do to upstage the Russians? And this was one of the suggestions. Well, put a man on the moon.
Which just like that.
Like that. But at that point, they had no idea what was involved in doing it, because they didn't have the rockets. They didn't have and it was only after they started researching it. And my opinion is that they decided around the time of the Apollo 1 fire. When three astronauts, Grissom, Chaffee, and White, were incinerated in a.
Because Grissom was quite outspoken about it, wasn't he?
He was. No, he was very outspoken about it, and with good reason, because he was probably the most respected astronaut at the time. So once they decided that they were going to do it, he was starting to get a bit outspoken about it. Whether it was a deliberate action to kill him, I don't know. There may well be implications about it, because his son, Scott Grissom, did get access to that capsule and did work out that there were some very strange things in the wiring and short-circuiting. Now, whether it was a deliberate action by NASA to shut Grissom up and to basically pass the warning on, look, guys, you get a step out of line, this is what's going to happen to you, could have been it. Because don't forget, NASA operate on the mafia principle, the silent or the silenced.
There's also, Marcus, there's also the strange coincidence of Thomas Ronald Barron. Now, he was an ally of Grissom's in NASA at the time. What happened to him? It's a bit...
He was killed, wasn't he?
Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about, as David Icke would say.
Yes, he was killed on a level crossing in his car
It was his family as well. It wasn't just him as well, was it?
His daughter as well.
The car just happened to break down as he was going over a level crossing, and apparently the barriers didn't go down and the bell didn't work and a train happened to be coming.
Yeah.
It's terrible bad luck. And just this was around about the same time as Grissom died in the fire.
Yeah.
And he wasn't even a train spotter, you know.
So
had he got his timetables right, he would have known there was a train coming.
And ironically, the train was owned by NASA.
Oh, really?
Oh, my God, I didn't know that. Now that makes it even more dodgy.
It was carrying a few capsules and things to Florida or something.
Yes.
But he actually wasn't a NASA employee. He was an employer. Was it Boeing or something like that? He was a contractor with Boeing rather than a NASA employee. But he was allowed, obviously, to see how things. Well, I say allowed. He spotted things going wrong in the system and could see the whole thing falling down. And this is. He wasn't like invited to testify. He just decided on his own about it. He was dissatisfied with the way things were going, wasn't he? And decided.
He was actually employed by North American Aviation.
Yeah.
And he was a quality control inspector and inspected the quality control, which he found to be seriously lacking, and wrote a 500-page report on it, which nobody's ever seen it. Nobody's ever seen that report. It was a 50-page summary of it, which is the only thing that has ever surfaced.
It's very convenient. They got rid of two members of the Apollo team who were working on the program, who really had serious doubts and serious concerns over safety and efficiency and effectiveness. Both died around about the same time in 67. And so if you were faking it, if someone was decided to put up a fake, you'd have to get these people out of the way. Yeah. You'd have to eliminate them.
Yeah,
what if any of them hung themselves in jail cells whilst the CCTV was all switched off as well?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how these things happen, isn't it?
Weird, isn't it?
There were Hasselblad cameras in those cells in those days.
Yes, which failed at the right moment.
Now, can I hear a doorbell ringing? Who could be that?
Is it Santa?
Who could be that at the door? Is it Andrew Johnson?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me on to the Christmas special.
Welcome to Andrew Johnson. As we've been talking about the Apollo mission, here's the man that we've been talking about earlier.
Yes, indeed. But we won't go into the Apollo with Andrew because obviously, he's probably had his mince pie, so he's he is, But it's great to see you, Andrew. So, how are you? How are you? How have you been?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just probably about as fed up as everybody else, but apart from that, okay.
Right, Andrew. What I want to ask? It's a Christmas show, and the old ghost, the ghost from the Christmas Carol. Well, and it's Paranormal Peepshow as well in here with Unite Planet. So, what I want to ask is, have you got any favourite ghost stories?
Well, actually, this goes back quite a few years. I've got two little ones. They're not particularly in depth, but one time I was going out with my dad, and we used to live in a terraced house, and we had a little car park, sort of gravelly car park just next to where we lived. It wasn't really our land. And I was just waiting to get in the car, and I heard these footsteps sort of walking. There was a pub just opposite our house, and I heard these footsteps sort of walking towards the pub. And it was a quiet time of day. I wasn't expecting anybody to be around. I think it was like Sunday, sort of, tea time. Not many people around where we lived then. And I could hear these footsteps. So I went over to see what it was, and I poked my head round the corner, but there was nobody there. So I thought that was a bit weird. I was sure that I would have seen somebody if because I was close enough and the footsteps were close enough. So that was kind of odd. But the other one was actually in the house we used to live in. And we used to have one of these clothes racks which attached to the ceiling, and it has like pulleys on it. So you let the rope loose and the thing comes down. You put the clothes on and you pull the rope and it goes back up. And we've got one here in this house, actually, a smaller version. But I was talking about this with my mum one time. And above this room, it was a big bathroom we used to have where we used to dry most of the clothes. And above that room, there was my sister's bedroom. And you know, and I actually heard when I was up there hoovering, because she used to give me money to hoover her room out for her, and while I was up there, I heard this squeaking noise, and this was the clothes rack downstairs. It was a pulley wheel squeaking, and I made a comment to this about this to my mum, and my mum says, "Oh yeah, the funniest thing was that Claire and Hilary, who are my sisters, they used to hear that noise in the middle of the night sometimes, as if this thing had been going up and down in the middle of the night." So that was a bit weird. But that was it. I mean, I haven't actually seen a ghost myself. I've heard a few stories myself, but not really experienced much.
Oh, great. So what's your favourite ghost story that you've heard?
Well, I mean, the stories that come to mind, there are many. I read a few ghost books, you know, in my youth, not so much in my adult years. But there was the famous one, this is quite a well-known one, of I think it's a place in York where there was a Roman road which had been built on somewhere in York, I think, or very near York, and there was somebody walking along the road, and they saw, you know, a group of Roman soldiers walking along this road, but they could only see them from the shins up, you know, and the feet and ankles weren't visible, but they were in a ghostly form, you know, and that was because the road was that much higher than the original Roman road. So it's seemingly they were walking on the original Roman road, which was lower than the surface of the road, and so they'd seen this Roman. I suppose you'd say, I don't know if there's a century, but this group of Roman soldiers, you know, I can't remember the collective noun for them now, but they would. That's a fairly well-known story that I think more than one person has seen that. So yeah, and actually one of the interesting ones that I came across not too long ago, because it was again near where I used to live, was these ghost plane accounts where people see a plane go over like a Lancaster bomber and it appears to be crashing. And then there's no crash, you know, and there's been a couple of those in the Peak District actually, and there was one in Yorkshire or Barnoldswick, I think it was, which was near where I used to live, and that was featured again about 10 or 15 years ago in the local press there. So yeah, interesting stuff.
Ah, yeah. So as it's Christmas, what are your plans for Christmas? Anything you got planned for over the festive period?
Well, I'm going to be mainly stuck here, really. You know, we have some family around and stuff, but unfortunately, I won't be travelling much this year. And we don't. We know my wife used to work Christmas. She's retired now, but she used to work pretty much Christmas. So we did. Christmas wasn't a particularly. We didn't do anything particularly special, you know. So, and I just regard it as the winter solstice. But one thing I will be looking out for, not on Christmas Day, but is the planetary conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, which happens, the best time is the 21st, although you'll be able to see it sort of a couple of days either side of that. And that's going to be in the southern skies after sunset. You'll only have an hour or two to catch it, and hopefully clear skies, about 15 degrees above the horizon. Look online for that. So I will be looking forward to that, and that conjunction hasn't happened like that for since I think 1623. So it's a very rare one. Although the next one I think is going to be in 60 or 80 years' time. So do have a watch out for that, everyone. I'm going to try and photograph that if I can.
So what we've heard, Andrew, is that there's like a shift of consciousness as we move into the age of Aquarius. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. I mean, yeah, there's some people are claiming this is one of the points where we went to the age of Aquarius. And of course, this has been talked about, I think, for at least 50 years. And it's one of those areas where when do you actually enter the next zodiac constellation, you know? And there's no specific time really, because it's quite a large scale thing that happens over maybe a couple of decades at least. So you could debate whether we're entering this age of Aquarius. And although people are saying that now, I'm immediately reminded of what happened in 2012, where there was claiming, you know, we're all going to ascend into this, you know, new spiritual state and stuff. And of course, there's no visible effects to me of that happening. I mean, it may have happened to some people that I don't know, but so we will see. You know, I don't like to predict the future.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see what happens.
Well, it's great to have you on here, Andrew. Thanks for joining us on this Christmas show. I know you're very busy and you have to shoot off and everything. But before you go, I wonder if you've got any Christmas jokes you can share with us.
Yeah. Let's go for a slightly, Did you hear about the dyslexic devil worshipper, Paul?
No.
He sold his soul to Santa.
Terrible jokes. Oh well. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us there. That was really great to see you.
Okay, so thanks very much for inviting me on to say these few words. I wish everyone a good festive season and happy solstice. I generally don't say Christmas much as I used to because it is based around the solstice, the pagan festival. So I wish everyone a happy solstice and a merry new year.
Thank you, Andrew, for joining us there. That was really great to see you. So, does anyone still believe in the idea of this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius? Ben, I mean, you come across anyone like that in your daily life?
All the time. I mean, the idea that there are shifts on a consciousness level in terms of the collective consciousness of the people, of a population, is very, very real. Indeed, ancient cultures often had ideas about ages that change over time. Now, the age of Aquarius actually refers to an astrological phenomenon, which is called retrograde precession. There are astrological ages, it's all to do with when the sun rises in which sign, which changes over a period of, I think it's 26,000 years. It's a very long cycle. And since about the time of Christ, we've been in the age of Pisces. Now, we're about at the point where we move from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. Now, the exact spot when it happens, there's no moment we move into the age of Aquarius that all astrologers and indeed astronomers, because even though the two rarely combine, but there's no sort of dividing line between one age and the other. It's some astrologers claim it won't happen for another 100 years. Others claim it happened in the 1920s. Things like that. But there's no doubt that if you are a believer in astrology, or like myself, even if you just entertain it and are open to the idea, which I am, although I'm not very focused on astrology, there are supposedly certain changes in group dynamics that occur at that time, and group dynamics within the planet as a result of that, which is very similar. It's very similar in many ways to other astrological forces which they talk about. Like they'll say, well, Mars is in Aries or something, that means there's going to be a war or something. There's always various, if you read like the annual almanacs that come out that give predictions for the year ahead, it's all based on that. Only this is much more long term, because if we're in the age of Aquarius, we probably will be until sometime in the 22nd or 23rd century. So it's a very, very long-term force acting here. What I find interesting is that there are other changes in ages which are far more precise. For example, the changing of the Mayan calendar, which took place on the 21st of December 2012. I think maybe you remember the big 2012 phenomenon that happened at that time. And also, strangely enough, in 2025, which is just 4 or 5 years away, the Hindu calendar changes as well, and Marcus will maybe know a bit more about that because Nexus has just done an article all about that. But we've basically been in what's called the Kali Yuga, and Kali is actually the goddess of the underworld in India. Yes, that's it. Yes, and we're moving into the Arya or Satya Yuga, which is sometimes called the Golden Age, where it's rather like the astrological ages because there's basically a different god or goddess rules over it. And the Hindu pantheon has no end. There's numerous gods and goddesses. I think there's hundreds of thousands of them, actually. And so it's a different god or goddess ruling over that era. But again, it's very similar to the astrological ages in Western astrology. There's a general trend towards different ideas and different happenings and different occurrences. And maybe it's something to do with the collective unconscious that Carl Jung discovered. Maybe it's to do with the 100th monkey effect, which is believed to be a phenomenon in which ideas suddenly, you get like a punctuated equilibrium. Nothing happens for a long time. Then there's a sudden change. and things like that's how it goes. And then there's another equilibrium, another sudden change. But so time will tell. But I'm very interested. I think it's a good time to be at this pivotal age, this kind of axis era where things are moving from one place to another. And it's we could have been born any time, and we haven't been born where these things happen in our lifetimes. And so we get to witness exactly what effects they will have. What they will
There's
do,
a
we
lot
don't
of
know.
solar activity as well. There's huge electromagnetic flares heading our way, to the point where it's going to start affecting our electronics and grids and electricals and all that kind of thing.
Is that the thing that happens every 11 years with the sunspots, or is this something completely different?
No, it is. It's the solar cycle. Yeah, we're out of the solar minimum now. It's interesting, Marcus. You could say that's because the solar maximum is when the sun is most active, and there's the maximum danger of radiation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're sort of entering that period now, and by 2024 we should be close to the solar maximum, and it was in 1969 as well.
That's right.
They do pick their dates, don't they?
Yeah.
When they want to get a roast.
The worst time possible if you want to avoid radiation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crikey. Bloody hell.
It's starting to build up again towards the maximum.
Mm.
I mean, looking at the surface of the sun now, it's starting to come up with some solar flares or some sunspots, which indicate solar flares, and they will get progressively more numerous over the next 7 or 8 years, and it'll gradually and then it'll decline again. But as you say, the Apollo missions, 1969, was the height of a solar maximum, which is not a very wise time to go out in space.
Unless you fake it.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you for that.
They just pull their visors down a bit, and they're okay.
Ben, how would you kind of quantify? Because I hear this a lot about this kind of like this ascension process and new ages of Aquarius and things like that. The problem I find is, how would you quantify it? How would you say? I mean, for instance, 2012. It was supposed to be 2012. The big thing happens. How do we know what that big thing was anyway? If it did happen or if it didn't happen?
Well, a lot of people sort of got very, very disappointed because nothing really major happened on the 21st of December 2012. It was a fairly ordinary day, actually. I mean, it was in my personal life. My partner at the time, her mother died that day. So in my personal life, it was a big day for me and for her. However, it generally was a pretty ordinary day. However, I don't think that was ever what intended. I never actually expected anything major to happen. But all I thought was that it's like flicking a switch deep down in the sort of in the energetic levels of where we can't perceive things happening, because underneath the physical world there is like a world of energy, and it's sometimes called the ether. You may have heard that phrase before. And what happened was that was just a moment where the ancient peoples of the world actually knew, the Mayans, the ancient mystics of Central and South America. They knew that was when there would be like a flick of a switch in this etheric body of the earth. Now, when that switch was flicked, it doesn't immediately translate into activities that we can perceive in the world at large on the material level, because everyone was expecting like either there'll be a horrible disaster like in that awful film by Roland Emmerich, which there's a 45-minute segment of complete destruction, or it would be like we'd all suddenly wake up in the morning and we'd be like completely transformed. We'd be like the priests of the Mayan civilization. And I said neither of those is going to happen. What's going to happen instead is nothing. What will happen is just forces were set in motion that possibly in the future would result in some kind of tangible change, some kind of something that would eventually filter up to the surface of the material world, and where we'd see something happen. Now, in my view, that has happened. It took a few years, but the world we're living in now is totally different than the one before 2012. Indeed, on 2012, I mean, several weird things have happened that would have never happened before, would have been unthinkable before. Things that I didn't predict. For example, in 2017, we had the UFOs, the UFO phenomenon. There was a major transformation in how they were portrayed in the media. I've never seen anything like that before. And also, we had several things that weren't meant to happen in the world of politics. For example, Donald Trump becoming US president. That was not planned by those higher up, the global government. They didn't want him as the president. They also didn't want Britain to leave the European Union.
Yeah.
We had a referendum that the Leave side, which I supported actually, was supposed to lose, and we didn't. Now that's very interesting, because you see, people in the conspiracy theory world, as I found, they often portray the New World Order as something invincible, something all-knowing and all-powerful. But it's not. It is fallible. It makes mistakes. It can be conquered. It can be overwhelmed. And really, what's happened, there's been many occasions when there's been some pretty big snafus in the engine room of that agenda. And I hope they continue. I really do. I mean, obviously, there's an attempt at electoral fraud in the United States, which everyone can see. It's visible in front of us, and no one can really deny it. And that's another example of how one of the things that they said about the age of Aquarius, what some astrologers say is, because I don't know about these things particularly, I'm not an expert. One of the things they said about the age of Aquarius, secrets will be harder to keep. And that seems to be what's happening.
Which culture actually mentioned the secrets that can't be kept? Was it Indian culture?
That's Western astrologers that have said that.
I did hear years ago that the world, like 2025 or something, the magnetic poles of the world will shift. And someone said once, well, what will happen if the magnetic poles in the world will shift? And this other guy said, well, everyone's fridge magnets will fall off at the same time.
I could tell you about that, actually. If you, I know someone else will want to say something, but let me just, the magnetic pole shift is actually ongoing. It's actually quite a long process. It takes about 5,000 years, but it's getting close to its peak right now. It's been going since about the 25th century BC. Now, it's nothing to worry about. Everyone says, oh, firstly, it's not one, there's not a single moment when it happens. It's a 5,000 year process, which we're kind of in the middle of. It'll take another 2,500 years for things to settle down once the poles are reversed. However, it's something that happens on average 3 times every million years. And it's not associated with mass extinctions or anything like that. But I think the fearmongers are going to try and make people scared of it. And it's rather like the 2012 phenomenon. They tried to put a lot of negative energy in Hollywood and that, with that Roland Emmerich film, that travesty. They tried to make everyone frightened of the 2012 dates, and so everyone would be just biting their nails and sitting at home when it happened. And in fact, it was a complete lie. And I think they're going to do the same with the pole shift.
Little sip of sherry there. Well, it is the festive season. Right, so we've come to the end of part 1. Some interesting topics discussed. We had the Apollo missions there, because we of course had the great Marcus Allen with us. We also touched on a bit of the culture of comedy, particularly in Britain, and the coming of the age of Aquarius. So we've touched on a few subjects there in this Christmas show, and of course it was wonderful to have Andrew pop in, surprise us all there. We'll have a few more guests popping in, and some other surprises and songs. Well, we started part 1 with a song, and we'll end it with a song. Only makes sense. So we're going to have a song that kind of, links into what we discussed before about the culture of comedy and some of the censorship through time that's happened. And this song has caused a little bit of attention with the censor police, deeming it a bit unfit for some kind of radio shows and certain publications because of some of the wording in it that they think is a bit offensive. It's all a bit crazy, but we're going to play it because we think it's a great song. It's Kirsten MacColl and Shane MacGowan, of course, the Pogues, and Fairy Tale of New York.
Let's have Kirsten MacColl. This song's called Fairy Tale in New York. Oh, it's Christmas Eve, and the drunk tank, and all my suffering. We'll say another one, and then we sang the rare old mountain dew that turned the festival. and dreamed about you. Came in 18 to 1. I've got a feeling this year's for me. So happy Christmas. I love you, baby. I could see a better time when all our dreams come true. You're pretty ground in your city when the band finished playing, they held out for more. So now just swinging, or just little singing, we kiss on the corner, let's dance through the night. Boys in the white pretty while we're singing all the way, and the bells are ringing out for Christmas Day. Yeah, I'll sell a chocolate girls, double, triple, and play. You scumbag, you faggot, you cheap, lousy faggots. Happy Christmas, you're ours, I pray God it's ours. Boys in the old pretty boys, the singing all the way, and the bells are ringing out for Christmas Day. That's all good, anyone. You took my dreams from me when I first found you. I cut down with my bone, I put down with my own. Can't make it all alone. I built my dreams around you. Then you were pretty worse to sing all the way. The bells are ringing out for Christmas Day.